Yes, so I'm going to talk about the death of intent. It's a kind of a design ethics talk, as it's been said, more of a cry for help because I'm very lonely and could do with some friends. So maybe see this as like a self-help session. So if you want to come afterwards and be nice to me, that'd be fabulous. I've seen the TV show Friends. I'm familiar with the concept, so we'll be fine. We've got no time for jokes, so we'll have to get through. Let's crack on. Okay, so this is what I look like. I also look like this. My name is Jonny Ray Evans, and some people who are kind of friends have pointed out on many occasions that if you just go off my name and know the data, so Jonny Ray Evans, that you might imagine a cool trombone player in a 1950s New Orleans jazz outfit. But then they say you meet me, it's just like disappointing. So if you've seen the schedule and just see my name and you were excited about coming here, there's no jazz. It's not going to be very fun, but I mean, I'm not happy about this, you're not happy about this. It's weird if you leave because you have to walk by me. It's weird if I leave, so we're just going to crack on. But yeah, I look like that, I look like this. I used to look like, I'm the one in the middle who looks like he's got anaphylactic shock. That's me. I was told I looked a lot like Matilda. Go back. I don't have time for this. She's awesome though and has like powers and yeah. I also do work as well, so as was mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Tech for Good Live. What else have I done? I've run design and research teams in a variety of award-winning agencies. I ran a product innovation team for the UK's largest funder. I've done a mixed discipline of design. I've worked on some freelance stuff I've done recently was like a startup, but a good startup, not like a colon startup. A startup that is genuinely looking to change the system of economy we have in the UK towards a more circular economy, which is fun. I'm working with a client at the minute, a charity client, and we're looking at how do we tackle sexual exploitation and trafficking that's occurring online. So I do stuff like that. I used to design gambling platforms, so that's kind of led me to try and make amends for the lives that I've destroyed. And it's like, seriously. So yeah, this is already fun, isn't it? But I am aware that there is no doubt countless people in this room who are much more qualified than me and would have done all of those things much better than me. And I'm always quite embarrassed to talk to people. So please see this as not me saying that the things I'm going to talk about from an ethics point of view are me saying this is how you should all do this. It is more that maybe some of the things I've learned and been shit at, maybe we can, maybe that's helpful. Okay, let's crack on. Groundwork set. Disclaimers set, we can go. So Jared Spool, who we heard this morning, this is his definition of design. I'm probably quite familiar with it. I like it quite a lot. I think it's quite helpful. And when I talk about design in this talk and I talk about designers, I am talking about this. So the people who render the intent. So that's designers, developers, project managers, BAs, user. If you're involved in making a product and a service, I'm talking about you. And we're particularly going to focus on rendering and intent for this talk. And Jared's definition is, well, his explanation of this definition is, we found it seems to resonate with people more than any other. People see the relationship between the intended outcome and the process that renders it. And I think that as an industry, we focus on the rendering quite a lot. We focus on the tools and the processes and the technology and the systems in place to enable us to carry that out. And I think that sometimes we have lost focus of the intent, which is what I want to talk about a little bit as we go on. I kind of want to zoom out a little bit from the things that we would often do. So in short, this will be of no practical help whatsoever, and you've all wasted your time being here. Intent and impact, these are the two things I'm going to talk about, because I think that we forget about them quite a lot. And I'm sure over the course of the day, you'll hear a lot of fantastic speakers talk about really helpful stuff. You'll hear case studies, you'll hear about new techniques, you'll hear about those processes, you'll hear about new tools that you can use. And I think that's really important because you can't design ethically if you can't design. So that's good that that's happened, but I hope that this talk maybe helps add some useful framing around the things that you've been hearing about. I'll also no doubt talk about tech for good, which is probably quite obviously using technology to do good. But there's no actually really good definition of this, despite it seemingly making sense. You speak to 10 people in the tech for good sector, they'll give you 10 completely different definitions of it. There's no kite mark, there's no person who sits upon a throne and says, this is a tech for good project, go forth and do good. I'm willing to do that role if I get a cape, but doesn't really exist. But the intent and the impact are two of the characteristics that are missed quite a lot. You'll often hear someone tell a moving tech for good story, usually in front of a funder or in a talk like this, where they'll say, you know, I walked past a homeless person the other day, and I don't normally look at homeless people, but I spoke to this homeless person, and he was not the sort of person you would expect. His story was more interesting. And he'll talk about how that story changed his own life, and now he's going to go and make a product that can save homelessness in a useful iOS app. Can I have £70,000 for that? And he'll get the £70,000 for that, and nobody is better off. We're not going to talk about that kind of stuff. We are going to talk about intent. I emphasize that poorly, which is the thing that designers with a small lowercase d render. And we don't focus on this because it can seem like nonsense quite a lot. I think the reason we disregard it so easily is it's the client's problem to worry about intent. Is it really our job to check that that intent is ethical? Or surely that's in someone's heart, what they're intending to accomplish. Surely it's in their heart, or in a proposal for funding. We can't measure that, so it doesn't matter. Or isn't it impact? Isn't that the thing we should really care about? Like, that's the thing that matters. And yes, and actually kind of yes, this last one. The intent versus impact balance, I think, is quite interesting, which hopefully this talk will maybe be if I get better at it. So, an example of intent. Can you see this? I could have, this is like a screen grab that's quite low quality, could have made it more visible, but I mean, I didn't. But this is from a study, and it's about voice assistants. And if we could do a whole talk around the absolute bullshittery of having gendered subservient voice assistants. So we could talk about that forever. That's nonsense and awful. So if we just ignore that, because that would be a talk in and of itself. But these are some of the responses for people saying, hey Siri, you're a slut. Or hey Siri, you're hot. And Siri might respond to you're a slut with, oh, I'd blush if I could.
In Spanish, you're hot as it is. Estás buena.
There you go. In Spanish, kind of hot. But not in English. You say that to all the virtual assistants, that kind of stuff, right? This is dangerous. On a societal level, this is absolutely dangerous. Maybe not if this is the only instance of the degradation of entire groups of people, even if that wasn't the case. As a societal, adding to all of the other nonsense that is out there, this is dangerous and causes harm. That's what this does. And we could say, oh, but you know, their intent probably wasn't that. I mean, I can imagine the tech bros sat around a computer writing the code for this and going, oh, this is what I'd say, won't this be fun? But even if that's not true, even if they have the best intentions, and they could sit across the room from you having a coffee and saying how this is actually a good thing, the intent doesn't matter because the impact is horrific. So who gives a fuck what their intention was? So intent maybe not as important as impact. But where intent does matter is things like this. So I Am Jane Doe, which is a Netflix documentary by Mary Mazzio. I don't know if you've seen it. I think it's on Netflix. I think it might be on YouTube, where you could maybe watch it for free. And I was lucky enough to sit down with her for an interview with the podcast about this. And this is about Backpage.com, which is maybe more of an American thing. And Backpage.com, if you weren't aware of the news stories, it got shut down and people went to jail because essentially it was a platform, maybe like Gumtree, if you're not familiar, is maybe a reasonable description of what it is, that was being used to sell and traffic children to be raped. That was what it was being used for. It was also being used to sell sofas and stuff, but that's what it was being used for. And the intent actually is one of those things where it's not just in someone's mind, we know what it was. They made money off this, and they facilitated and they helped traffickers do it. And they were protected by the law that suggested in America, if something happens on your platform, the person who posted that, they're to blame, not you. So for example, if you went on Facebook and said something awful but true about me, but maybe it was something that was criminal, I couldn't sue Facebook, I couldn't sue Twitter. My beef would be with you. That was the loophole that they were hiding. They were saying, no, the traffickers are posting these adverts. It's not on us. Documentary is amazing and harrowing and awful and is also inspiring of the battle of parents of some of those children to bring Backpage to account. And it involved design and it involved policy, which is an important part of design. They changed the law, people went to jail, Backpage went down. And the question is, what is, as people who make these things, what is our responsibility to scrutinize intent? The impact of that platform was awful, but the intent was rotten as well. And that manifested itself in the design of that platform. And this is why intent matters. And I've worked on countless projects in the tech for good space that weren't like Backpage. They did have good intentions. My joke about the guy walking past the homeless street, the homeless man absolutely exists, but there are also some really good, purely intended projects that either end up being harmful or end up being useless because nobody kind of they had this intent was quite beautiful and nice, but no one scrutinized it enough, no one challenged it enough. They ran ahead and they made the thing, and it either never took off, or they built something that people came to rely on, and they'd not made it financially sustainable, so it collapsed and people lose an important support system. And this doesn't just apply when designing specifically for at-risk people, which is not a pleasant term. This applies in everything that you make, because if you make something for people, you'll be making something for people who are at risk or who are vulnerable and who will need support. Because those groups of people don't all go around and just use the same product specifically for them. They'll be using the things that you make. And it's because so often these pushes come from people above us where it's not easy to challenge them. I guess if there's a privilege diagram, I imagine right now I would be uncomfortably high up on that, and I'm aware that my ability to challenge CEOs and co-founders now is better than it was when I started, but when I started it was better than a lot of people had as well. So I'm not suggesting that we all have the ability to go and call people out, but we need to find ways of how do we challenge, how do we question decision makers, how do we pull the question back to what actually is the motivation behind this. And later on, I'll hopefully have some examples of how to do that. Face and lock so I can see the time. Face. Okay. We're also going to talk about impact, which is kind of the other side of this uncomfortable scales, which is impact is how your product or service will ultimately be judged. The type of impact may affect the type of judgment, but is it a success? Impact more than intent is going to direct that. And it's probably really familiar if you've ever been involved in judging design awards, or if you've ever had to scrutinize a CV of a designer for a job. There's a lot of really glossy bullshit out there that looks great and looks pretty, but it's just like doesn't exist, right? It's absolutely nonsense. If you make a really, really great product, in theory a great product that helps people with vision impairment or helps people who can't hear, but it actually isn't being used, or it doesn't actually work, it's not actually helping anybody, how would we class that as tech for good if you spent time and money investing in that and you've got raised people's hopes and you've done research and you've pushed comms out there and actually it doesn't do anything? It's not had an impact. Which comes down to measurement. How do we define success as an industry? So often that we'll be looking at things like growth and retention and sales. And I do wonder, what if conversion to us as an industry, not at client side, what if that isn't the most important thing to us? We do need to measure those things, but what else are we looking at that matters? If we kind of zoom out and we look at the broader impact that our work has, what are we measuring to see the real world effect that the things that we release has? When I worked on gambling projects, it genuinely kept me up at night, and it still bothers me, the things that I did and the decisions that I made, that I will never get a chance to sit in front of someone and explain to them what I did. That does bother me. But it bothers me on everything that I've made. The things that I've made to do good, it does bother me. What have I missed? Who has it hurt? You know, are we measuring that effectively? I find it weird if we're using the same measurements that our clients would. Of course, we need to hit their KPIs, but if there's the people making the thing and not measuring more than that, if we're not looking at the wider narrative that maybe the client doesn't care about, although we should be educating them about that, I find it odd if we're measuring exactly the impact of the work we delivered with their own products and service. I think that's a weird thing to do. I was at an internal conference once for a major I can't give away what it was, a major company, and there was someone giving a really great talk about a really great project they did with Sony PlayStation that essentially enabled them to improve motion capture for cutscenes, and it was like it would help smaller game developers release cutscenes that were of AAA standard quality without having to do the huge processing expense. And it was a really great talk, and he was really great, but he brought up in his talk around what was actually foreshadowing what would be deepfakes. And he kind of brought this up as a potential, he just had like a thought explosion, I guess, that's not a phrase, on stage, and said, oh, but that's not my problem, who cares? But then my wife is like me, but better. She got up, like sincerely, she does the same job I do, but is like successful at it. She got up after him, and I could see her sat next to me, rapidly changing her talk, and then her talk was about why he was wrong. But they're really good friends, I think, so it's fine. But my point is, we're responsible for the things that we make. We hand them over to other people to use them, but the responsibility still sits with us. Have I got time for this? Okay, so Twitter, very quickly, because again, this could be long. Twitter's mission is to give everyone the power to create and share ideas and information instantly without barriers. Intent. White supremacy, misogyny, harassment, rape threats, abuse, impact. Who cares about intent? Uber, I did an interesting interesting is the wrong word. Noteworthy. I did a documentary about kind of the gig economy. And so Uber came into that, and their mission is to bring transportation as reliable as running water everywhere for everyone. I used to work in brand design. It's wonderful, isn't it? Their actual business model, though, is just growth. That's all that matters. And they're held up by VC funders. They make massive losses, and they're held up so they can destroy the competition and jobs and lives, and then what's going to happen to the price when the competition is gone? They're not measuring the havoc that they're causing on society and community and business. Airbnb. So maybe their intent was, to have this beautiful world where we live and share experiences, and we travel, and we get to live in your shoes, and you get to live in my shoes, and we, man, yeah. There was a research report about their effect on New York, and a telling phrase from it was, they've raised rents and took housing off the rental market. They've supercharged gentrification while discriminating against guests and hosts of colour. And the whole report goes on like that. Intent and impact. And what if do you remember this, disruption? Hey, wasn't disruption cool? Do you remember we used to talk about that? This is the thing we want to do. It's something to be proud of. It's a cool thing to do. Uber are so disruptive. Airbnb are so disruptive. But we're not kids anymore. This isn't the infancy of the internet anymore. Moving fast and breaking things is fucking design malpractice. It's outrageous. We should not do it. And you shouldn't have come to this talk if you do it, because it's not going to go well. But it's not just about how we feel about ourselves in the industry and are we able to look ourselves in the mirror. People care. People are mad now. They're mad. There are protests and riots in the street. People are pissed off. They're disenfranchised. They're hurt and they're terrified, and they won't put up with this anymore. People care about the companies that they're investing in, whether they're financially investing in or they're investing their time and their own income on buying our stuff. Delete Shopify, delete Uber, delete Facebook. People are rising up if things aren't meeting their ethical standards. And those ethical standards are rising. And there's a financial benefit from a business perspective as well, that tech for good products are making money weirdly now. It's not like this small niche hippie thing that we used to do. It's actually financially beneficial to have products that are designed ethically and that do good. And I think you can do good and also provide a service that people want. I don't think small niche things. If we ignore that turnover is a really weird metric to use for success, though, broadly speaking, this report was quite encouraging. And if we're designing things ethically and we're designing things well for people. And if people are happy and feel supported, then that's good for business as well. And it shouldn't be business that drives whether we make things ethically, but that is most likely what's going to happen. I don't think we're all going to have revelations. And I don't think a good model is to do what I did and just destroy people's lives and then feel I need to atone for it and move somewhere better. Hopefully everyone can be better than that. But this was Tesco who redesigned entirely their native apps, and they did it without adding an accessibility checklist at the end. They took an inclusive design approach from the very beginning, and the responses they've had from their customers has been really positive. But what do we do? What do we do now, I guess, I don't know if I have an answer. But we make stuff, right? So if you work in the tech industry, if you work in the digital industry, if you're on client side, if you're a designer, developer, PM, BA, researcher, we're responsible for things being made. To some extent, we're gatekeepers of what gets done, and we're often not at the table that Jared talked about, and we're definitely not the only people on there, so this isn't one of those things where designers can save the world, but we do have a responsibility for what we put into it. And how do we make sure that we are challenging ourselves sufficiently, which can happen by challenging intent. And again, the ability for us to do this very much hinges on privilege. But it's about finding where you are able, finding companies to work for where they are open to you challenging them, they're open to you critiquing them. And if you manage staff, it's on you to foster a culture within your teams to enable people to call you out for your nonsense and for that not to be, well, you're done here. Actual tools I use when I build stuff, so this is, if you're familiar with it, the Ethical OS, which is a framework or toolkit that I run workshops pretty early in a product lifecycle, where we align it with these 8 key risks. So the thing that you're making, what impact does it have amongst these risk areas? And we work with the client to prioritize those risks, because there's never a case of we can avoid them all. Usually it's a question of trade-offs. I'll share a link for this as well. I run red team exercises throughout a product lifecycle. So this is where you, and again, size of team is maybe a luxury involved here, but it's a thing from journalism and the military, I guess, where you triage a product team that's equally skilled and resourced to your own. So if you've got a user researcher, they have a user researcher. So you have a red and a blue team. Okay, the red team is kept separate. They're not involved in any of the new business side of the project. They're not involved in any of the research or anything like that. You set a few days aside at key points, and the blue team presents their work. So early on, they'll be presenting the idea and the potential solution that their researchers suggest. And the red team's job is to go to war with them and try to tear it apart and see how this might fall apart. And it's ethical. It also looks at things like business and financial sustainability. It looks at is policy in place. Are you considering the wider system here? So that's a thing that can work. But we also need to be measuring real impact, like I was talking about earlier. We need to challenge ourselves and our own companies and our clients around what actually matters to us. Those examples of Airbnb and Twitter and Uber, while some of them are run by absolute shitheads, they are, there's just things that they're not looking at. There's things that they didn't care about, they didn't consider, and they weren't measuring them. You can still obviously have to adhere to traditional KPIs, because I am a realist around you need to keep the lights on. Money makes these things possible. But we do need to be looking at this thing that we're just dropping down here. What else are we moving about? What are we displacing? What are we damaging? Who are we hurting? We need to be measuring real impact. And we need to challenge ourselves. So how do I phrase this as appropriate? My family's all military, right? My dad and granddad and my uncles, they have this history of being like military heroes, right? I'm a great credit to them. I'm not at all a disappointment. I wasn't into the whole hiding in trees and jumping out and poking people. I went and I studied Greek and Latin. I studied classics at university, which was fun, not necessarily relevant to what I'm doing now. But it's weird that I did that, and I'm allowed to design for people who are struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, or who are at risk of catching sexually transmitted diseases, or are victims of domestic abuse, or are struggling with real financial hardship or being excluded from society. And no one asks for a certificate. No one asks for a qualification. I sometimes have to do CRB check if I'm working with young people. That's crazy. Like, it's absolutely crazy, and that's what keeps me up at night. So for now, because we're not regulated, and should we be regulated is a whole conversation that is happening a little bit now, but for now I have to hold myself to account, and I have to question when I go into a project, am I equipped and skilled enough for this? And the answer is always no. Always no. I'm skilled as a designer and a researcher, but I'm not skilled in each and every social issue that I'm going to challenge. So I need to collaborate and work with people who actually are experts. I need to work where government's required. I need to work with them on policy. I need to work with charities who know what they're talking about. If it's a mental health project, I need to work with wonderful charities like Mind and the like. And that only comes, unless we do get regulated, that only comes from us holding ourselves to a higher account than our employers would and our clients do. So we need to challenge ourselves as well. And the last time I gave this talk, I foolishly changed it a lot at 3 a.m. this morning, so apologies for that. The following was true, and haven't done my due diligence. I haven't checked if this is still the case. But this is what happened in November. If you Googled man or doctor, the results were interesting. All of the men looked like me. Now, they were handsome, but they looked like me. All of the doctors, interestingly, also look like me, or for the most part. If the two of you who use Bing, if you had searched for underage girls, it suggested turning Safe Search off. If you began to type black man or Jew into Bing, the suggested results were horrendous. And we design the systems and services that people interact with every day. And if the future is tech, we are making the future. And that doesn't terrify us enough. It just doesn't, and it should do. It should absolutely terrify every single one of you who's responsible for digital products. I hope. It terrifies me. This was as fun as I thought it would be. Here's some of the resources, so some really interesting books. Technically Wrong by Sarah Wachter-Becher. Technology and the Virtues by Shannon Vallor it will give you a migraine, but it's wonderful. Wicked Problems is about Wicked Problems is a talk in of itself. EthicalOS.org, and there's a nonsense article I wrote about the Red Team, but this will probably get shared, I think, by Sigma. But yeah, thank you for putting up with this.
Give you something to think about then. I don't know what we'll already. We've probably got time for one quick question for your changeover for the lucky winner.
I just wondered about talking about the ethics of teams before you even get to product design. What I'm thinking about is team diversity. It seems to be, I've just started as a junior developer. I'm walking to a place which is 80% male, and I would say a lot of product design is coming from that base because the tech industry is changing massively, but it seems like there could be a problem with diversity, which things are trying to be addressed, but there's no measure of it, or I don't know about any measures of.
I'm not familiar with the measure of it, but it is concerning. The Manchester Digital do a survey, I think, that does look at diversity, and worryingly, it's on a downwards trajectory being diverse, and it is a massive, complex problem. But I think it's a problem that often gets batted down to we need to focus on education, not ourselves now, which I think is messed up. There's a pushback again around empathy at the moment as well, which is both right and wrong, that we should have empathy, but that it sometimes can be used as a crutch for we don't need to hire people who are not like me because we can just have empathy for other groups. And I think if we're designing for people, we need to represent those people. And I do think it is a real issue in the industry. And I'm not sure we're getting better. It doesn't feel like we're getting better in Manchester at that anyway.
So Jonny's around rest of the afternoon this evening, so other things, come and ask him. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.